into underground facilities, and in some cases undersea facilities, where they interact with or see extraterrestrial or seeming alien beings. So I accept that they're down there. I might add that people also report being abducted by factions of the American military and taken underground into these facilities. So it's very bizarre, and these are criminal activities, by the way. If you were kidnapped, that used to be a capital crime. So I don't think it makes it all right for the military to stealthily abduct people. If you were to do that, you would be subject to incarceration in the penitentiary,
Sure.
potentially for decades. So why is it okay if you have an American military uniform on to sneak around abducting people, and yet this is going on?
These ET bases, are they being done with our cooperation?
I think in some cases it looks like that's what's happening. And it raises a host of questions for which I don't have ready answers. But the questions themselves trouble me, and I believe they trouble many other people who think about these issues to an extent.
Now, are there craft also underground? Or
Yeah, I think so. And in fact, I have an illustration from Look magazine from 1955 in my book. There was an article that Look magazine came out with in 1955 pertaining to the many flying saucer sightings that were being had around the country. And people were talking about this. It was a real topic of conversation back then. You may remember that, George. I was a kid then, but I remember that a lot of UFOs were seen where I lived in the Tidewater region of Virginia. So this Look magazine article actually has a depiction of an underground flying saucer base with a camouflaged opening in a mountainous region, presumably of the United States. Now, the thrust of the article is that this base would have been an American flying saucer base, but how strange that Look magazine in the mid-1950s presumed that the American military was building or would soon build flying saucers and would have its own underground flying saucer base. There you have it. It's in the open literature, and I include that illustration in my book.
And Look magazine was at the forefront of these reports during those days. I mean,
yeah, they had a lot of interesting articles. They carried some of Jackie Gleason's work on UFOs. He was pretty outspoken on the topic.
Yeah, he was a believer. Well, and he claims that Richard Nixon showed him an extraterrestrial at Homestead Air Base in Florida.
Yeah, I've read that story, and I'm inclined to believe it. Why not? Because a lot of people have come forth in recent years alleging to have seen a variety of alien corpses under many different circumstances. So I can believe it. Ryan Wood has certainly demonstrated to my satisfaction that the American military has recovered many crashed UFOs, or in some cases apparently shot them down, and that presumably there would be corpses of whatever entities or beings were in the craft that they would also take possession of. So I really, at this point, don't have any trouble believing this type of story.
What do you think these ETs are doing here? Why bases?
Well, they would be underground and or undersea for the same reason that terrestrial humans would be, to conceal their activities, for a level of security, physical security, and privacy. So that would be the reason. It's not only, we have beings here that are being very stealthy, whether we're talking about terrestrial human factions in the military, in civil government, or in other agencies and organizations, and also factions that evidently are coming here from off the planet, and they all are behaving in a very stealthy, furtive, furtive manner, which raises a lot of questions. What are they hiding? What's to hide?
Absolutely. Tell us about the case of abductee Krista Tilton.
Well, have you talked to Krista yourself, George?
I have not.
Well, she was really more in circulation back in the 80s and I'd say early 90s. I don't know if she really makes public appearances anymore, but she did for a while, and I talked with her a few times. Her story is that she was abducted and taken underground to a base that she believed was in northern New Mexico, which she thought was the Dulce base. She doesn't know exactly where it was, but she was taken there by clandestine elements of the American military and also saw alien beings there and some weird genetic and biological type of research and experimentation, ostensible cloning programs and that type of thing. The technology that she saw, the biological technology that she saw, was frankly bizarre. And also the interaction between the military and the aliens and between her and the military was frankly also bizarre. I think something very strange happened to Krista, and I'm inclined to give her the benefit of the doubt because there are other people who have come forward with, if not precisely the same story, at least stories that bear some resemblance to what she has reported. And it does appear that certain factions of the American military are involved with certain ET or alien factions underground, and it seems that they're up to no good.
Why the lie, Richard? Why the big cover-up?
I don't know, but the lying is epidemic. And it's not only the projects themselves, but it's the if you will, the social technology of compartmentalization that permits, the mass deception of society by concealing the activities of very large numbers of human beings in society. And this social technology of compartmentalization is extremely advanced and widely used by the military-industrial espionage complex. And there's also the question of the funding for these things. You've interviewed Catherine Austin Fitts.
Yes, all the time.
Yes. She's quite knowledgeable about this, and there's no question that trillions of dollars have been sucked out of the federal budget and out of the economy in general. It's been sucked out of our pockets, literally. This money's been taken from us, and it's been lavished on projects and programs about which we are told little or even nothing whatsoever. And I'm back to one of my main points. It's our money. We deserve to know. We ought to know. We should know.
How do they cook the books? How do they hide the money?
A lot of ways. Bill Gawley, in the book I mentioned at the outset of our interview, Breaking Cover, told how already back in the 50s and 60s, the American military used what was essentially a shell game, where they would funnel money from the Army through a little-known engineering office in the Chesapeake Division of the Naval Engineers. And according to him, it was so adroitly done that even a practiced accountant or a really eagle-eyed spy would have trouble tracing the money. They've only gotten better at it in the last half-century, and the amounts of money involved now are just mind-boggling, off the charts. I've talked about this with Catherine Austin Fitts before, and she said to me, and I agree, that with the amount of money that's in play, this black budget money, which runs evidently into the multiple trillions of dollars, that with that amount of money you can do anything at all. You
probably makes the TARP money look like loose change, Richard, doesn't it?
It does. It does, because we're talking about trillions of dollars by those standards. We are being mugged. The American people are being shook down. It's frankly a very organized crime. It makes sense to speak of the United States government at this point as a criminal syndicate, as a massive global money laundering operation.
Any records that you stumble across about any catastrophes that could have occurred during construction of these tunnels and these bases or anything like that?
Well, I can tell you that in general, construction work is dangerous work, and mining is dangerous work. So I don't have any doubt that men would be killed constructing these projects. But if it's a clandestine project, of course, there would not be an obituary in the local paper saying Joe Schmo was killed working on a top-secret compartmentalized program underground. There would be a cover story to account for the death if it was publicly acknowledged at all.
Richard, tell us a little bit about where you get this book. You put a lot of work into it, Hidden in Plain Sight.
Yes, I have. I spent years working on this one. I did devote more time to it than some of the others. And the best place to get it is at keyholepublishing.com, and the links are up on your website. If people want to check that out, they can click right through. Of course, they can also get it at amazon.com.
As you look at what has been going on, the fact that we're not going to be told about it, can we assume that if an event occurs, let's use the old asteroid for lack of a better
Yes.
Is it going to be one of these things where it just hits us and then they tell us, or they run around and it's panic mode?
I really don't know, but what's clear to me at this point is the United States government is a rogue regime. We see criminality on every hand, not only with the bailout bills and the TARP funds and stuttering, officers from the Federal Reserve who come to Congress and just point-blank lie about the disposition of trillions of dollars under their control. It's the whole system is wildly out of control, and what we see is incompetence and criminality run amok right across the gamut of federal agencies, from one end of the United States government to the other. It's a mess, George, and I think the American people understand this at this point. So, go ahead.
Who do you think's in charge then with all this?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? We have a president who's transparently really good at reading teleprompters. So who writes all that stuff on the teleprompters? Beyond that question, who's really in charge at the Federal Reserve? Because we have officers of the Federal Reserve, whether it's Ben Bernanke or the chief financial officer, who will come before the Congress, and you read their remarks in the transcripts, and they're impenetrable. They're spouting nonsense. It's just indecipherable. It's not intelligible by a person of a normal mentality. So, who is in charge, and who actually writes this nonsense that's spouted, whether by Ben Bernanke or Barack Obama or Timothy Geithner or any of them? I have been told that there is another level higher up, that someone like the President or United States Senators or the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or the Queen of England, say, or the Pope in the Vatican, so forth. These people have a degree of power in their sphere of action or of influence, but that they in a sense are puppets for other power brokers that stay in the shadows, who run the so-called shadow government, and that there is a degree of global or international cooperation. There is not really any publicly known name for this organization. I've heard it referred to simply as the organization, or the foundation. In one case, one person refers to this shadowy agency as the foundation, but having been around for a long time and operating over a long period of history. What the ultimate agenda is, I don't know, but you could make a good case that it is to enslave the human race, because that's where we're headed.
When you first started uncovering these things, specifically the bases, did
Yes.
you believe it? Did you believe it yourself?
Well, I was amazed at first, George. I was really kind of astonished. When I did the first article for UFO Magazine, I really had the feeling that I'd exhausted the topic, and it wasn't until I had the voice speak to me in the night over the holidays in 1992 and tell me right out of thin air, and I'm not exaggerating here, I heard a voice right out of thin air that spoke in my inner ear that said, as clear as a bell, the underground bases are real. I now understand that the alphabet soup agencies have brain transmitters, if you will, that permit the transmission of intelligible speech directly to the auditory cortex of the human brain. So this is not science fiction. It's not magic. This is nuts and bolts electronic engineering, and decades old, by the way. So someone wanted me to inquire into this subject more deeply, and I have and continue to do that. But I was astonished when I started first going into the primary documentation, looking in the federal documents, military documents, and going to the engineering literature, looking in the corporate documentation and so forth. Yes, I was amazed at some of what I ran across, and at first, yes, I believed it, but I was at the same time almost flabbergasted to discover these things, and that persisted maybe for about 6 months or so until I got the lay of the land a little bit and began to understand there's a lot going on underground, and now I also understand there's a lot going on undersea, and we have been so massively lied to. It's disappointing. It's dismaying that we have people who presume to be working for us, and really they're psychopaths. We're talking about pathological lying here, George. It's disappointing.
And I'm sure they've got their ticket when the time comes to be.
Well, they do. They do. If they're on the inside, they do have their ticket, and there's a certain amount of smug one-upness or one-upmanship associated with this, which, by the way, I don't like either.
It's kind of like the old movie Eyes Wide Shut, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I thought that was a very good movie. It was the last movie that Stanley Kubrick made, and there was a great deal of truth in that. He dealt very much with this corrupt, shadowy organization that pulls strings behind the scenes, and if you cross your path, you're dead. If you cross their path, if they don't like you, you're just dead meat if they perceive that you're interfering with their agenda, and they more or less make whatever laws they want. They break whatever laws they want to. It's their way or the highway, and they're here. Stanley Kubrick was saying, look, these people are here. They're real. They're ruthless. They're without scruples. They're wealthy. They're powerful, and they're running things from behind the scenes.
And they'll do anything they have to do to take advantage of all of us, Richard.
They're doing it now.
Yep. Stay with us, Richard. We're already at the top of the hour. We're going to come back with a final hour with you, and we'll take phone calls on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, in this hour, we're going to take your phone calls now with Richard Sauter. Fascinating research here that he's put into his latest work, Hidden in Plain Sight, and we'll be back in a moment with your calls on Coast to Coast AM. Richard, before we go to calls, what can we do? I mean, we can't go running up to our elected officials and say, we know there's a base there, because they won't admit it. What can we do?
Well, one of the things we can do is inform ourselves. For those who want more information, they could profitably read my books. That's one thing they can do. Another thing that I think is the only possible antidote to corrupt government is to withdraw cooperation from it. So I think ultimately we need to begin withdrawing our money and our support from this criminally corrupt government. With the passage of each year, it seems to become more and more of a problem to the country. It's not helping us. It's taking our money, actually stealing our money. It's theft by taking. It's lying to us. So under those conditions, I think we're entitled to keep our money for ourselves, pull it out of the big banks, pull it out of the government agencies, stop voting Democrats and Republicans into office, and we really need a National Truth Commission to sort some of these things out. Not only the question of the underground and undersea bases, but the conduct of the war against Iraq and Afghanistan, of the assassinations, stretching all the way back to the 1960s, and especially and including the false flag attacks of September 11th, 2001.
Yeah, that's a whole issue all by itself. Which,
but it's linked to the others.
There's this chain of events that has occurred.
It's a
probably.
rolling coup d'état that's taken place over a period now of about half a century. And with each new event, whether it's assassination of a president or a presidential candidate or planes slamming into skyscrapers in New York or declaration of a war on false pretenses, on, or just outright stealing money from us to our face by the trillions of dollars, this is a slow-motion coup d'état intended, and I say it again, to enslave us, to reduce us to nothing.
Do you believe that there's one of these bases under the Denver airport? Because I'm getting strange stories every once in a while.
Well, I'm not clear on that. I'm not clear on that. I don't know what's under the Denver airport beyond normal airport infrastructure, like baggage trains and passenger trains that go out to the concourses, that type of thing. What I can tell you is there are multiple levels of very shady and secretive goings-on beneath Washington, D.C. I'm much more concerned about what's happening there, and there's good documentation for that. We have been, let's put it this way, what goes on in Washington, D.C. is not at all what we're taught in our American civics classes in high school and when we go away to college.
And you can't learn that in a book, Richard, can you?
You have to learn it the hard way, and the country is learning it the hard way by having our money stolen from us by people who then lie to us shamelessly and come at the next election cycle and ask again for our votes. I'm simply proposing that we stop voting for them.
Here we go. Let's go now to Bev, Dayton, Ohio. First-time caller, Bev. You're on Coast to Coast.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Hi, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm kind of taking my life in my hands talking to you about this. I live near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And as a little girl, I rode my bike around to the neighborhoods and everything, and I actually saw one of the tunnels being built because they would never think of a child going into an odd area to see something like this.
So they would just let you freely pedal your way in, I guess, huh?
Well, actually, no. I kind of pedaled my way in, and then I got pedaled out. It's like, go away. I actually looked down, and I saw a tremendous tunnel going under a highway very close to the base. And during the summertime, when it's quiet and there's no cars on the highway, you can actually hear humming off and on under the highway like a motor coming and going, like something's traveling under it. And they recently built a hatch in one corner of the base, right out in public view, and it has no purpose there except possibly the entrance. It goes right through where the tunnel was built. Straight
down. Now, how far down the tunnel did you get before they escorted you out?
I didn't actually get down. I actually looked down. They were building it. I was on top of the surface.
Okay.
And it looked to me like it might have been 50, 60 feet down.
What year could that have been, Bev?
It was in the, I would say, late 50s.
How's that timeline, Richard?
60s. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for the story, by the way. Yes, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base has been a subject of many stories about underground facilities and tunnels. And I accept the story the caller tells and the other stories. A lot of things have gone on at Wright-Patterson. I was told that already back in the 60s that the Air Force had 2 models of UFOs that they flew out of Wright-Patterson in the middle of the night. I talked to one of the members of the Project Blue Book team, and he told me that they would fly them out of there during dark nights and during the time of the new moon. They would open the hangar doors and fly the things right out. This was UFO type technology. The military has technology they haven't told us about, and the propulsion that they use, the different types of systems that they use in some cases, it could be of great benefit to society. It's being held back from us. We've paid for it. It's been developed by people on the public payroll, and it's been kept back from us. In effect, it is the patrimony of the human race. It's actually the intellectual property of the human race, and it's being held back from us. Our military, our government are actually committing great crimes against the American people.
Richard C. Hoagland believes that there's a secret space program going on. He may be right. Yeah.
I think he's right. In fact, I suspect there's more than one secret space program going on.
That could be too. Let's go to Cameron, West Jordan, Utah, west of the Rockies. Hey, good morning, Cameron.
Hey, how are you guys doing? First off, I'm a listener, first-time caller. But you guys were talking about the underground tunnels and stuff, and I've heard rumors of Denver, Colorado being like the new unofficial capital of the United States. Mm-hmm. And then I wanted to see also if any of these underground tunnels had to do with, I heard the rumors of the Area 51 being transferred to like southeastern Utah. And then on an additional note, the National Truth Commission sounds like a good idea, Richard and George. We should start that if it doesn't already exist.
I like that. I wonder who would be on that panel, Richard. Who could we believe?
Well, I could think of some people that would be good to put on it. I'd put someone like Jim Mars on that panel.
Mars. I'd put Ron Paul on it too, even though he's.
I wouldn't because he's too much a part of the establishment. I would not put him on that panel.
You would not.
I would put someone like Catherine Austin Fitts, someone like Cynthia McKinney. Mm-hmm. I would put for starters, those would be some of the types of people I would put on. I'd have to think about some of the others. I would not put Ron Paul on it. He's compromised.
What do you think of Area 51?
Oh, very serious research and design takes place there. It's very much a functional, active base for the military-industrial espionage complex. There's certainly large underground facilities there. There's a lot of exotic technology that is tested and designed and deployed there.
As private as it must be, confidential, it's probably the most widespread of the facilities, underground facilities that are out there.
Well, I'm sure it's one of them. In general, Nevada, the entire state of Nevada, has a lot of underground activity. I would also include New Mexico very much in this conversation, and a facility like White Sands Missile Range, for example, which would be very much the same type of facility as Area 51, but receives less attention. But it's also a large, sprawling southwestern facility where the military-industrial espionage complex carries out a lot of cutting-edge R&D.
Let's go to Tampa, Florida. Hello, Brenda. It's your turn. Welcome to the show.
Hi, George. Hi, Richard.
Hello.
Hello. Disheartening, but very interesting. I have two questions.
All right.
MacDill Air Force Base is under the water, and we've heard of people sighting planes that just come out of the Gulf or the Atlantic, and I'm wondering if maybe it's been connected with the Bermuda Triangle, and Another question I have for you is my father fought the other monster, Hitler, as a 19-year-old boy. You know, he went in as a officer, and, it looks like, we're fighting some other unknown demons, and I'd like to know when maybe this unpatriotic America started.
Oh, that the corrupt criminal government has been in the works for a long time. As regards MacDill Air Force Base, my understanding is it is not actually underwater. It's in Tampa, and it is near the water, but not under the water, is my understanding. As for objects seen coming in and out of the ocean, yes, this has been observed many times over the years by numerous witnesses, both in on shipboard and also from land. So this is a phenomenon.
Are they aircraft, Richard? Are they?
Well, yeah, I think some of them are. I do think some of them are. Others presumably are not. But yes, this has been observed many times. There's no question that it goes on. The only question is where they're coming from and where they're going to and what they're doing and who's on them. But that it happens, there's no question.
International line, we've got Steve in Saskatchewan, Canada. There you go, Stephen. It's your turn.
Hey, how you guys doing tonight?
Okay,
Good.
Steve.
Awesome. I was just wondering if there's any underground bases in Canada. Like, I've heard of a facility, a NATO facility in Thunder Bay, but anything else?
Yes, there's one there. There's a sister facility in Thunder Bay to the NORAD facility in underneath Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. However, my understanding is that the NORAD facility at Thunder Bay has been deactivated and is no longer an active military facility. But yes, my understanding is there are other more secret facilities elsewhere in Canada, underground.
So they're all over the place, as you said.
Yes, they are.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate your call. Anonymous, Eugene, Oregon. Okay, here we go. Hi there.
Hi, this reminds me of a movie I once saw. It's called They Live, where Roddy Rod Piper puts on the glasses and he sees things how they really are, where the aliens are in control.
Maybe.
Aren't you worried about them taking care of you, that you're exposing all this information to society?
Scared of that,
Actually,
Richard?
No, I'm not worried.
At all. All right. Well, that's pretty gutsy. Sometimes, do you ever look over the old shoulder?
No, it's not a question of having guts. It's simply what I do. I'm expressing my humanity, essentially, and I'm not scared to do that. I think rather if I were some of these people, I would, there's certain spiritual realities, and it's possible to so damage your soul that you virtually can't recover from that, and you lose your humanity once and for all. Once you get into mystical literature, you understand what harm you can do to your soul if you set out down a dark path intending to do harm to others. And that's what we're faced with here. We're faced with some real nefarious agendas, very dark, very secretive, very powerful, and at their essence, very destructive. And so those who are involved in these programs are really putting their souls at jeopardy. So on the contrary, I am not frightened to do what I'm doing. Simply what I do is to write and research and talk about what I discover. In fact, it's my right to do that. And it's my human right to do that at a very deep level. And it's the human right of every single person within the sound of my voice to take this information in and to act on it in whatever nonviolent way they perceive as appropriate. I would say there are people out there calling for violent retaliation. I'm not one of them. I, in fact, am a firm advocate of radical nonviolence. I would tend more to be in the camp of a Mahatma Gandhi or Dr. Martin Luther King,
Yeah.
for example.
Can you imagine, Richard, what they could have done with the money for society instead of using it for these facilities?
Quite a lot of good, actually, George. There's tremendous suffering, and not only to use it for these facilities, but so many trillions of dollars are being lavished on warfare, warfare is a dead end. I mean, it seems like a truism, but that's the way it is. And yes, this money could be very creatively and productively used in wonderful, constructive ways. This planet could be a harmonious, peaceful, really almost could be almost a paradise in many ways. But we have very dark beings, not only running the American government, but some other governments on the planet, and the large banks and so forth, and military institutions. Dark beings of very limited, violent, destructive, hateful mentality. And I think the only appropriate way to behave towards them is not violently, but nonviolently, by nonviolently, peacefully withdrawing our cooperation from them personally and from their projects and plans, not cooperating with their warfare, and by withdrawing our money and economic resources from, frankly, the vast criminal Ponzi scheme that is called the American economy.
Don't you think one day people will say enough is enough?
Well,
And
that
they'll
day is already starting, George.
And they'll
That
start
day is
doing it.
beginning. It's beginning this year in 2010. I think we're coming up on that day, and I think a lot of people, by the millions, are simultaneously realizing that, as you say, enough is enough, and we're tired of the psychopaths. I personally am tired of the war. This is just war after war after war. I'm tired of it. Enough.
Well, you're not
How
alone.
do you end the wars? By not participating in them. Don't go in the military. It's bogus. What have the people in Afghanistan ever done to us? Why are we even fighting there?
What about the Iraqis?
They haven't done anything to us.
No. Let's go to Paducah, Kentucky. Zach, it's your turn. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, George. Man, this is really off the wall, but, I've traveled out to South Dakota before, and I've always, I watched old programs like Cheyenne and Maverick all the time. And,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
and they always talk about, like the Sioux Indians had caverns and caverns of massive amounts of gold, and I was just kind of wondering if maybe your guest had, and of course I haven't listened in the first couple hours, I'm really sorry, but if possibly the U.S. government at one time had found those caverns of gold or the city of gold and, utilized that.
I don't think the Sioux Indians ever had caverns of gold, number one. But there were rumors that when the conquistadors arrived in Mexico, when Montezuma saw how violent and greedy they were, that there was a train of Aztec gold that was brought north into the Four Corners region of what is now the United States. I don't know if that's true or not, but perhaps something like that did happen.
We'll be back with final phone calls with Richard Sauter on Coast to Coast AM. Hey, for just pennies a day, you can join StreamLink and get your iPhone apps, podcasting, special archive programs, and also listen to the show whenever you want. That'll be StreamLink. On our next Coast to Coast program, Graham Hancock joins us, his latest work, Entangled. He, of course, will discuss his research of lost civilizations. That'll be our next Coast to Coast show. When we come back, let's take final phone calls with Richard Sauter right here on Coast to Coast AM. Richard, what can you tell us about the Stanford Research Institute's 1968 report on these manned undersea bases?
Yeah, they came out with a report entitled The Feasibility of Manned In-Bottom Bases. They actually were talking about making 30 undersea bases down in the seafloor beneath the bottom of the ocean. And in their scheme, which was somewhat similar to what came out of China Lake, they felt like bases could have three possible functions: industrial, scientific, and military. And by the way, any given one base might simultaneously serve both an industrial, scientific, and a military function. Conceivably, one or more of those could be clandestine. I take that document very seriously. It, again, is... you have to understand that that SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, is very much like the RAND Corporation, for example, and that it is a think tank that is much used and has been for decades by the military-industrial espionage complex to develop new technology and new programs. For example, the U.S. Army's remote viewing Stargate program, which was run jointly by Army Intelligence and the CIA, was first developed in prototypical form at SRI back in the 1970s, and then was moved to the East Coast, and the training was done at the Monroe Institute in Faber, Virginia, up in the mountains, and the actual operational aspect of the program was at Fort Meade in Laurel, Maryland. So I take that document very seriously, the more so since I do have anecdotal accounts of undersea bases from multiple sources, and also the documentation from the Navy itself.
Okay, back to the phones we go. Norm, Little Rock, Arkansas, first-time caller. Hey, Norm, go ahead.
How you doing, fellas?
Okay.
Ben, I have one question. I'm a first-time caller, like you said, and I'm glad I got through, and I'll take my answer off the air just because I know other people are wanting to call. My question is, not too long ago, there was a report out of somewhere about the NASA, a lady, like a scientist or whatever for NASA, that come running out of her office, and she was, screaming, "The world needs to know. The world needs to know." And so what happened was she ended up either like just keeling over or something and dying or whatever. But they also her office burned right after that, and I was just wondering if you think it has to do with that, or if you have any knowledge or whatever. But like I said, I'll take my answer off the air. And thank you guys. And another thing is, Richard, man, I'm feeling your pain, and I'm with you 100% on agreement on what's going on, how we're getting rooked, man. Later.
Okay, my friend.
Well, thank you for the comments, caller. I appreciate that. And no, I don't have any specific knowledge of the incident that you relate with the scientist at NASA. However, I would say that I've seen enough with regard to NASA that I know that NASA has covered up quite a bit of information. I do believe that in global form, Richard Hoagland is right. NASA is hiding a lot. I don't know why they are. It's a public agency. They ought to be reporting everything they discover to us and to the scientific community, and they should be doing it openly. However, it seems that certain kinds of information have been held back. Just more disappointment. What can I say?
All right, back to the phones we go. Zeke in Dallas, Texas, east of the Rockies. Go ahead, Zeke. You're on Coast to Coast.
Good morning, George. Good morning, Richard. I'd like to start off by saying long-time listener.
Thank you.
Tonight's show is absolutely riveting. Richard, one of the few things I've got is you said earlier that there was some secret organization that you really couldn't put a name to. Have you ever looked in the direction of the Bilderberg Group?
Yes, I'm familiar with the Bilderbergers, and they do have a name. And there are other groups somewhat similar to the Bilderbergers, like the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and so forth. So there are a number of these. There are many multilateral organizations that have various plots and schemes for controlling political and economic and military affairs on this planet. What I'm talking about is an organization that ostensibly would be at a higher level and more secretive level even than that. I couldn't say more about it other than to say that I've heard it mentioned. I'm willing to believe that something like that may exist.
Okay, Zeke, thanks. Let's go next to Nancy, International Line, London, Ontario, Canada. Go ahead, Nancy.
Hi, good morning. I'm from North Bay, Ontario, and During the Cold War, there was a major underground complex built in the Cambrian Shield there, which is very hard rock. I mean, it's one of the oldest in the world. And this was, missiles were brought in. I remember this as a child. Missiles were brought in and housed there, and it is affiliated with NORAD in Colorado. So when you mentioned Thunder Bay, I'm wondering if you have the wrong city. Because I've been down into this huge complex. It was housed by military, Canadian and American.
Yes.
And it has been downsized, but it is still active. I mean, that's a major engineering. They wouldn't close that.
Well, there may be more than one facility, and I know they did burrow down into the Precambrian Shield there, because that's very hard rock and a very stable rock mass. I don't know everything that's been done in Canada. As far as that goes, I don't know nearly everything that's been done in the lower 48. So yeah, there could be more than one. But when I say Thunder Bay, it's a large geographic area, no doubt, and that it was referred that way, referred to in that way in the literature I had available to me. I've never personally visited the place, but I've seen many references to it.
Richard, do you get any support from peers or colleagues, anybody like that, who back up your work?
Somewhat, though I'm kind of the odd man out pursuing this line of inquiry more or less by myself. There aren't many people who do this sort of research, and no one who's done it in just the way that I have. So I guess I get a certain amount of moral support, but there's really not much exchange of information, if that's what you mean.
Years ago, when I first heard of you doing some reports, before I even had a chance to interview you, I'm going, oh, this guy may be fun, you know, Jesse James caverns and stuff. And I went, oh, no. He goes in much deeper than that.
It's a deep topic, no doubt.
Absolutely. Las Vegas, Nevada. Justin, you're on with us on Coast to Coast. Go ahead, Justin.
Hi, guys. I actually have some personal experience with all this. I grew up in Sedona, Arizona. And when I lived there, I started hearing a lot of rumors that there was an underground base near the city. And if you know anything about Sedona, it's a small little town, and there's just wilderness all around it and a bunch of mountains. And I heard these rumors, and it just struck me. I thought, I got to look into this. So I spent 10 years, it seemed, that just the whole time I lived there looking into it. I talked to a lot of people, heard a lot of crazy stories, stuff right out of the X-Files. And I believe there's something there. It's just so super hidden and secret. But there were just so many stories of people hiking out there and being accosted by military guys and hearing rumbling and humming noises underground and seeing trucks and military trucks going into the wilderness and disappearing where there's no military base. There's nothing around there. There is a military base about 30 miles north, but that's it. And when I lived out there, I heard the noises myself. I heard the hum that it's as if there were semis going up a steep hill. And it's underground, if you could imagine that. And it's out in the middle of nowhere, and there's just nothing there. There's no machinery, no buildings, nothing. So I heard it myself, and I believe my phones were tapped when I was looking into this. I mean, I'd talk to my friends about this on the phone at night, and we'd just hear these clicking noises. And we had landlines at the time, and you just hear these little clicking noises and just weird static on the phone. I've never heard it before or since. And I just saw so many weird stories and crazy stuff. And I think it's different from the idea of Mount Weather and Cheyenne Mountain and these places we know about, Area 51, we know about these places. They're kind of half underground, half on the surface. This thing is totally super hidden. It's super secret. I believe it's there. And I know where it is, general idea, but it's just totally underground. And I think it's connected maybe to the base 30 miles north, or it's connected some way. But it's there. But it's just so super secret, and I think there's a difference. There's the Cheyenne Mountain stuff, and then there's these other bases out there that are just out of this world, super technology, and I think people, maybe they go out and they take a hike and they see something weird and they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But if you start connecting these little stories, and you hear the same stories, different people, they'll be out there and they saw these little silver balls that would float around. And that sounds crazy, but I've heard other stories of people who've seen these in other places. And they're like little surveillance devices, and they float around out there, and they're watching. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. But when you hear enough stories, and they all kind of line up, it's something to think about. So I just wanted to ask you about that. Maybe you've heard of it.
Well, sure. In fact, I used to live up at Flagstaff, and I've done some hiking around the Sedona area myself. There's no doubt that some of these underground facilities have exotic technology, and that so much information has been held back from us. There's no question my research reveals unambiguously that there are secret underground bases created by the American military. There's just no doubt of that. And my research also shows unambiguously that these bases can be very deep, a mile deep, and even much deeper than that. They can be accessed by vertical high-speed elevator shafts, by horizontal shafts that go into the sides of cliffs and mountains. The entrances and exits and air shafts for these facilities can be and are camouflaged. So I certainly have heard many stories about the Sedona area along the lines of what you've just related to us. So I'm keeping an open mind about Sedona and the surrounding area, and I don't rule out at all that there could be one or more super secret underground facilities in that region.
I bet we'd be in awe, Richard, if we saw one of these facilities.
Well, from what people have described who've been in them, and from what I've seen in my archival and documentary research, we're dealing virtually with a parallel universe, a type of science fiction reality. And I say again, we have been so lied to, just massively lied to. It's pathological. We have been betrayed. I would use that word. We have been betrayed. At a very basic level, there's a type of treason here. We have been sold out. And the picture that's coming into focus for me is real ugly. This is no small thing. It's not like a personal indiscretion or something like that. This is a massive crime against society from the highest and deepest levels of the military-industrial espionage complex and from the highest and most powerful levels of the American government, the corporate structure and the American government. They have used us, they have lied to us, and they have betrayed us and sold us out.
And worldwide, though, Richard. So.
Well, worldwide, but it's centered here in the United States. Like it or not, this is the most powerful system on the planet at this point in our history. So it really centers here. It may go on in other areas of other regions of the world, but here in North America, there's a real nexus of these shenanigans. And I wouldn't let the American government off the hook. They have done us wrong.
Reimersburg, Pennsylvania. Hello, David. Let's try to get you in and maybe one or two more callers. Go
Good
ahead.
morning, George and Richard. I have great information. If you'd like to call me back later, I can give you even more documented evidence and things that are going on here. That has been called the Iron Mountain. It was the first of the ones built underground, I believe, from what we can see, linking areas of Washington, D.C., New York City, going to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and out west. This was done.
Where are you located?
Reimersburg, Pennsylvania, but this area, USIS Iron Mountain, is a city underground. Over 6,000 people work there each shift throughout the day and night and evening. And then they have...
What town is that in?
It's in northern Butler County. It goes the whole county over. Has Air Force has a base where for an airport has a mountain that has range with the railroads going through it. They have two plants that they've started. This was commercial shearing in Youngstown, Ohio, where they got the steel, and in Gary, Indiana, and also in Pittsburgh. And they have their own steel plant now, right in the middle of a rural area that they supply their steel. And they started all this engineering here through commercial shearing. And then they have buses that bus these people inside there from a busing called Campbell Busing. They have a hand scan they have to go through and a face scan. I went through there. Down there, it's over 1.5 miles deep. It's like a city. It goes all the way along, and they have They say they store every book that or tape or record or film that has ever been done, and they have all the criminal records stored there, and they also have enough room there for over 800 people to supply over 8 years underground, and it's the president's cabinet and their families, and they have the airport there is accessible. They have it because it's the gateway of the Alleghenies. The largest locomotive capital of factory in General Electric has in Grove City. It's nationwide. They sell to the Arabs and everything. Well, anyhow, they work with Magnetics, and it's another company supplying high-speed rail underground. And then Carnegie Mellon University.
Why don't you write an article like
engineers?
that and post it? Why don't you write an article about everything you know and post it to the internet?
Absolutely. I mean, that's huge. And we'll get your number too, David, and we'll follow up with you. But you know what? It's continuing cooperation for what you've been saying, Richard.
Yes, I expect that there's a lot of this going on, and I would like to know more information about that. And it would be wonderful to interview that guy, or I encourage him to write an article and post it widely to the internet. We need people know information all over the country, and those who have information need to come forth with it. We need thousands of whistleblowers. Let's air this out. If these facilities exist, and they do, we're entitled to know about it. We should know about it. And if the government won't tell us that, then let's please tell each other if they want.
We own it, right?
We should tell each other.
We paid for it.
Exactly, and we should tell each other what we know. And shame on the government for lying to us and stealing from us.
Richard, hidden in plain sight, available at the bookstores right now?
Yeah, well, it's at Amazon.com and at KeyholePublishing.com.
Okay,
Those
great.
are the two sources at present.
Super. Thanks, Richard. Richard Sauter. For Dan Galante, David Benjensky, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean LaDesseur, Ross Mitchell, George Nappy, and Pundit and Art Bell, I'm George Norrie. Somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.